Ah, sunshine, sea breezes, and a bill for the taxpayer. You know, when public officials travel for work, what do we, the public, really expect in return? Today, we're going to unpack a source document that takes a close look at one of these trips, and it asks some pretty sharp questions about accountability and the real value of attending a conference in a beautiful coastal town. So, what's this all about? Well, it really boils down to one simple question. Was this a crucial business trip, or was it more of a winter escape funded by the public? That's the core tension we're going to explore as we go through the details here. Okay, so before we dive into all the controversy, let's just lay out the basic undisputed facts that are presented in the source material.
So who went on this trip? We've got two key figures, Mayor Patricia White and Councillor Selena Clancy. They headed off to the Australian Coastal Council's conference in Mooloolaba, which, is a pretty popular tourist spot. And the source makes this point crystal clear from the get-go. Every single cent was paid for by the ratepayers of Shoalhaven.
Now, after a trip like this, you'd probably expect a pretty detailed report back to the council, right? Well, according to this source, that report is exactly where the story starts to get really interesting. The author's entire argument really centers on what was, and maybe more importantly, what wasn't in that document. So what was actually in this report? You might think it'd be a summary of key takeaways or a list of recommendations for the town, but according to the author, it was, get this, simply a reprint of the conference program. No analysis, no reflection, just the schedule of events. And that brings us right to the heart of the author's argument. They don't just say the report was a bit thin. They go into detail about exactly what they believe is missing and why it's a big deal. Their critique really breaks down into three key areas. Okay, so the source basically breaks down its criticism into three big problems. First, there was no local application. The report allegedly failed to connect anything discussed at the conference back to the specific issues Shoalhaven is facing. Second, a lack of transparency. The author claims there wasn't even a cost breakdown, which would apparently go against the council's own policy. And finally, no recommendations. And this is the big one. If there are no new ideas or actions for the council to consider, then what, the source asks, was the point of the trip in the first place? And speaking of transparency and spending, the author doesn't just stop with the conference. They point to another alleged expense involving the very same councillors to suggest that, maybe there's a pattern here. First up, an alleged lunch expense for Mayor White, which the source says cost ratepayers $186. Then another one for Councillor Clancy for $163. The author presents these very specific numbers to really drive home their broader questions about spending and accountability. So this is where the author really starts to zoom out and connect the dots. They argue this isn't just about one conference or a couple of lunches. No, they frame this incident as just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Part of what they allege is a wider pattern of issues happening within the council. And to build that context, the source points to these recurring themes from its own reporting. Things like allegations of a toxic culture, a focus on political spin, questions about developer influence, and critiques of the competence of the majority voting bloc. So from this perspective, the Mooloolaba trip isn't some isolated incident. It's presented as a symptom of these larger alleged problems. So after laying out all the evidence and the context, the author doesn't just leave you hanging. They basically turn the verdict over to the public by posing a series of direct and honestly pretty challenging questions to their readers. First, they ask about the process itself. Should councillors have to prove a trip delivered tangible value before they get their costs reimbursed? It's a direct question about getting value for money and, really, raising the bar for accountability. Next, the author just comes right out and asks the question that's been kind of bubbling under the surface this whole time. Was this trip really a working conference, or was it more of a holiday? They put it right out there for the public to decide. And finally, the author kind of floats a potential solution by asking this: would you support stricter rules on reporting? Rules that would require mandatory details on costs, on the lessons learned, and exactly how it all applies back home in Shoalhaven. The source wraps everything up with this one killer line that really sums up its whole argument. If residents are paying for sunshine getaways, we deserve more than agenda notes in return. And it just leaves us all with a final critical question. When our public money is spent, what is a fair expectation in return? According to this author, it's a heck of a lot more than just a copy of the schedule.
On the council, truth